What's up, good people? Michael here, host of the political podcast, Cuckoo for Politics. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. This is Raw and Uncut. It is a special political series where I have candid discussions on a whole host of political topics. Depending on the intensity of the subject matter, you can occasionally find this episode to be of serious nature or could be lively, hence the name Raw and Uncut, as sometimes my guests and I either make fun of a particular topic or point out the hypocrisy of any given issue, as politics in general can be a mixture of both. In this episode is titled Silent Signals. It's how the use of coded words in describing racism and sexism in today's politics. We will explore how certain phrases or words are used to convey discriminatory ideas indirectly and discreetly, allowing targeted listeners to understand the hidden messages behind them. Joining me in this discussion is my guest, Sam Jean. Those that follow the podcast know and are very familiar with our backgrounds. We had a series of Raw and Uncut shows together. Past episodes can be found on the popular platforms you're just listening to, Spotify or Apple, or Google, not Google, cuckooforpolitics.com. Feel free to listen. We have very good content in that. But if you're not aware of who we are and new to the podcast, first let me say welcome. But I don't want you to feel left out. Just in brief, Sam and I have been friends for decades since our collegiate and postgraduate years. Each of us have earned our respective degrees with distinction. Moreover, we have actively participated in various forms of political activism while working in our professional fields. What makes my guest Sam Jean the podcast go-to for Raw and Uncut is that he has his own consulting firm. He's appeared in both foreign and national media outlets. He's an adjunct professor in law and communications at accredited university. We are both passionate and cuckoo about politics. That's why we always come back together and discuss the issues of today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Cuckoo for Politics. Let's get ready for some lively discussion while learning something together. What's up, good people? Michael here, host of the political podcast, Cuckoo for Politics. I'm back. Yes, we're talking about the election. This is a special election edition. Again, season 4 will begin in the new year. But I had to come back to discuss the hot topics or issues that have taken place in this election season. We are a few days from the election. November 5th is election day. Most polls open at 7 a.m. and they close at 8 p.m. If you are in line on election day, you're definitely able to vote. If you check your local dates and times if some of you are doing your mail-in ballots, but definitely vote. November 5th is election day. So, as you see, I'm wearing a sweatshirt. Voting is my black job. Now, voting has always been my job as an American citizen. But I find it fascinating from the first debate with Harris and Trump, he made references to black jobs, and the others are taking our black job. And so the phrase voting is my black job was definitely embraced. I took it. I think the Obamas made it definitely put the cherry on the sundae, so to speak, when they spoke at the Democratic Convention. Sam, thank you for coming back on another episode of Raw and Uncut, and this on the special election edition. I want to talk to you about when did you become black? As you know, that's when Trump made a reference to the vice president that he didn't know she became black. Why is race still an issue in 2024? And what is your black job?
So the funny thing about that is I don't think there's anyone who follows Trump who doesn't understand that he doesn't even do a wink wink dog whistle, right? He does an actual affirming of racism. People don't want to admit that, but Trump is the white supremacist candidate. There's no white supremacist who's voting who's not going to vote for Trump. And so when Trump does these things, it's really not speaking, even though we're going to talk about his support his rising support in the African American community. But when Trump talks about her not being black, it isn't really for black people, right? It's for white people, because white people think that being a minority is an advantage. And so Trump's argument is, look, she's this when it's advantageous to her, and she's that when it's advantageous to her. She's not a real person, and she's part of this system that is continuously scamming you. Pardon the noise. You, Mr. Miss White American, who doesn't get to check Black, Indian, Hispanic on an application, right? And so his appeal is to those people who feel like minorities use their minority status to get advantages over other people. And that's really what it is. It's like, yeah, look, this is this other person. She can't decide if she's Black, if she's Indian, who knows? Now that she's trying to win over Black people, she's going to say she's Black. But if she was trying to, it's actually a silly argument. And I was actually quite pleased that the vice president didn't take the bait. She didn't take the bait and go for it and spend her time talking about race. Because the funny thing is, and studies show this, like white people get uncomfortable when Black candidates starts talking about race, even if they support it, because they feel like that may turn off other white people. And they're like, oh, we don't want to turn them off. So let's mute really the discussion about race. And so with Harris, not only do we mute the discussion about race, we also mute the discussion about her gender, right? We mute the discussion about here's a woman who is running against a man. Let's just put it there, right? Here's this woman who's running against a man and the optics of that and what that looks like. So Trump's conversation is rooted in what I would call the 80s New York City racism, because when he says a Black job, he doesn't mean, the head of a union, right? He doesn't mean an attorney. He doesn't mean a doctor, because for people caught in that, Black jobs are menial jobs, Latino jobs, Hispanic jobs. They're menial jobs. Okay. These are jobs of people who are janitors, who work in lunchrooms, right? Who clean hotel rooms. These are the Black people who sort of permeate his world. And coming from someone who is from that 80s New York white racism, it falls perfectly. Of course, he thinks that Haitians are coming in and taking jobs meant for Black people because, God forbid, right? Like, he doesn't worry about someone coming in from Sweden and taking the Black job of a Black engineer, because for him, those kinds of people don't exist. The only Black people that exist are people who do these jobs. And to the extent that there is a Black person who's special to him, like Dr. Ben Carson, right? There's only a small percentage of them. So when he's speaking that's one of the times where he's actually telling the truth. Where
I'm glad I'm sorry to interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Ben Carson, and which I think is a good thinking about the Black job. I remember when Ben Carson was running for office for president in 2016, not once did he talk about urban and housing in any of the debates. Yet when Trump was president, he gave all the white men key jobs. He gave the white females key jobs. Not to say being Secretary of Housing and Development is not a key job, but the only Black Republican that he knows of, his Black friend, he gave him housing and urban development because that is his Black job. That's where you need to be. Dr. Ben Carson, a medical genius. You think you should be Surgeon General. maybe Secretary of Health and Services, but no, he gave him the black job. You deal with housing, you deal with those things, because that's what you people do, and that's the black job he's talking about.
That's exactly right. And what frustrates me about how Trump is covered is our media has a blind spot to that. They don't want to. We know what he means. Every black person who watched it, they know what he means when he says black job. That's why we look at each other. We're like, what is he talking about? A black job. And so there is, and that also demonstrates his lack of understanding, because one of the things that I've learned over the years in terms of where my life has taken me is that people who have an incredible amount of money, an incredible amount of fame, an incredible amount of celebrity, they can be insulated from regular people. Trump doesn't know any regular people. And if he does know regular people, they work for him. And so their job is to please him, make the boss happy. You're great, and he thinks that he treats them great. And for him, there's a world that he inhabits, and there's a world that everybody else inhabits. And so you should be concerned with illegal immigration, black person, Latino person. You should be concerned with that, because these people are coming in and they're going to take jobs that are for you. Now, mind you, he even acknowledges that these aren't great jobs. Right? There's this economy, but you're not entitled to a great job, black person. Right? You're entitled to a black job. You're not entitled to a good job. And it's so incredibly offensive on its face. All you can do is actually laugh, because I'm watching the news and reporters don't even want to say this very basic thing that all of us watching know what he's talking about. So part of Trump's appeal, obviously, is racist. And anyone who tries to deny that is just spitting in the wind, because they can't fool us. When you say those kinds of things, you can't fool us. Right?
Yeah, it reminds me of the, I forgot the term, but after LBJ, when he became president, and then Nixon succeeded him. There was a Southern strategy. They were saying, we're going to have to turn. They had key words that Nixon and Reagan used to let whites know that I'm your friend. They would use states' rights. There was another term, I don't know if you can remember, but there was another term that they used to get the white voter to say, you know what, that's my guy. He didn't say it because we can't say that word anymore, but that's my guy. Similar to when Trump and his supporters say Harris is a DEI hire, because they don't want to say the other word, the N word, or anything offensive. They say, well, we'll just use this coded word. So again, racist tropes. And last note. Do you remember George Bush Sr. when he was running for office? They use, I believe, the Willie Horton story when he was running for office against Dukakis. And they kept showing a black inmate, and they made sure that image was darker and that it was a revolving door. And they kept showing that image to show once again, oh, I can't say those words, but that's my guy. Let me elect him. So I guess the black job is the new coded word.
It's funny you mentioned Willie Horton, and it's funny you mentioned DEI. Again, this is something that frustrates me when I'm watching it, and I'm certain that there are a lot of other minorities who watch it, and they're also frustrated because I only know excellent black people. It doesn't matter if they're doctors, lawyers, whether they're teachers, whether they're janitors.
Thank you, by the way, if you're acknowledging me. Thank you.
Oh,
appreciate
yeah.
that.
Well, I was going to leave you guys. But and almost every black person, this is anecdotal, but in my life, when I have run into a black person who has a position of power, whether they were running a record label, whether they were running a company, whether they were a partner at a law firm, what I knew about that person was that they were extremely competent, they were extremely smart, and they work their behinds off in order for them to get that position. Because I know that being a person of color and being able to get in those positions are not easy. Let's put the racism aside. A lot of what happens in corporate America, a lot of what happens is nepotism. There's a reason why these people pay millions of dollars for their kids to go to schools with certain kinds of people, because they figure for all the talk that Republicans make and all this noise that they make, that they're with the common man. When you look at these people, like you look at, for example, Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Ted Cruz went to Princeton and he went to Harvard. Why? He could have gone to a more conservative law school. Why did he chose to go there? Because he had ambition. He had ideas. He knew going to this school paves the way for me to get this and to get that. And so when there are Black people in those spaces, I always go, okay, this isn't a space that Black people tend to accommodate. And it's not because we can't be there. It is because there are systematic issues that still need to be resolved in order to have equity in this instance. So when they say DEI, and by the way, there's no company in America that has a quota. That's nonsense, right? But when they say DEI, what they mean is here's a Black person who has a really good job. That's all it means. And then they'll say, if that Black person is not good at their job, that the reason they're not good at their job is DEI. Meanwhile, a white person in the same job will tank a company. And no one will say, well, he got that job because his daddy gave it to him. Okay?
And that's Donald Trump, because he got that job by his father.
You see my point? He's not a DEI hire. There's nothing unfair about it. If he makes mistakes, it's not because he was given the job or because of his race. And that's also what they're saying too, is, oh, this person made a mistake because they're Black. They're not good at this job because they're Black. And that's something you hear enough of it. It gets pretty annoying because, again, in my life, in my business interactions, in my political interactions, in my personal interactions, I'm surrounded by magnificent people. Some of who happen to be Black, but I'm surrounded by great Black people. So I don't ever look at it as that. The other thing about the DEI thing is it makes it seem like it's only about race. But DEI, if you studied it, is much more than that. DEI could be race, it could be gender, it could be sexual orientation, it could even be religious. You could have a company where there are no Christians working at this company. It's a company full of agnostics. And there are certain things they may not think of, right? Because this company is just completely run by agnostics. And the flip side, you could have a company that has no agnostics or no atheists. Everybody there identifies as a Christian. And so when Christmas time comes along, it's not an issue. It's not an issue. But then you bring someone in who's not of that. It makes the company think about things differently. You know what the biggest DEI is? The biggest DEI is the NBA. The NBA is diversity, equity, and inclusion. They purposely go to other countries to find players. It's not that they can't find players here, but they do it because they say it's better for the brand. We can get more fans. We can make more money if people look and they see people who look like them participating in the league. Some of them happen to be great, by the way.
Yeah, NFL tries to do that too, but NBA has definitely been very successful. I want to say even baseball, they do a job like that.
Baseball does it, but baseball has always baseball has had this long interaction with minorities in terms of after baseball got integrated. But what you see a lot of Latin countries that are involved in baseball. You don't see that many European countries. But basketball seems to me to be the one sport where you actually have people playing from literally every continent. Okay. As somebody is playing, and the NBA decided at a certain point that in order to maximize their product, that they needed to invest in bringing in people from overseas. Now, that doesn't mean that Luka Doncic can't play. Of course he can play. He's a very good player. But for the NBA expanding into Europe, we might never see him or Jokic.
Sure. And you brought sports into it, and I'm thinking of when Trump talks about these words, the others and female. I think about do you remember? Well, you and I we were alive but not present. And I say this in the 70s. You remember there was a battle of the sexes. There was
didn't that come on
Bobby
ABC?
Riggs.
Didn't that come on ABC?
Yeah, Bobby Riggs and Billie Jean King. They battled because who was the best tennis star, and it was Billy was the one that galvanized all the men, and Billie Jean was like, no, I could do it too. I think this could be one of the last hurdles in the U.S. That is, if she was to succeed, she would not only break the glass ceiling, but the fact is she would make advances, because we talked about that a little on the side, that Trump supporters, he's appealing away to black men. He's appealing some Latino to that machismo aspect of it all, because he said it himself. I don't have, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he doesn't have the support of women as Harris does in large part. He has support, but not significant enough like women. So he's now going after the men, banging chest, and Hulk Hogan for that matter. That's why he brought him out for his Republican convention, because it's appealing to that.
So
that narrative.
Let me switch places with you. Let me ask you a question. Why is it, do you think, that Donald Trump doesn't have the support of women?
I mean, I would say this. One of the main reasons is not only the Roe versus Wade, but a right for a woman to choose. There's also the when he ran for office in 2016, grab him by that. I mean, those were the other scenarios that he said. The way he demeans women, forgot the number, but he also lost in the defamation suit against.
I was waiting for you to get to that. Women. Yeah, so women, I gave you a really easy question and you let him off the hook. Like women.
I did?
Yeah, you did. Because you're being very nice. You took too long, Michael.
Well, I'm the host.
No, remember we switched spaces.
Oh, okay.
No, but you were getting to the point is the man is convicted of being a sexual assaulter. That's one. The things that he has said about women, if women don't, like, he makes it seem like women don't like me, I don't know why. Women, every woman I know knows a guy like him. On some very basic level, they've worked for a guy like him. They have a guy like him in their family. They dated a guy like him. They know a guy like him. And for a lack of a better word, the man is a cad. I would use a different word, but the man is a cad. They know he's kind of slimy. You know, we used to talk about Slick Willie, right? Like he's the opposite of Slick Willie, right? He's just he's creepy.
He's the father of IVF. Don't forget that. I was going to bring that up too. I was leading up to it. Yeah,
no,
the man.
Listen, he's done more for black people than God himself. He's done.
Thank God and Lincoln.
He's done more for Jewish people than God himself, right? He's done more for women than God himself. Like, he's done more for every group. If you brought a tribe of indigenous people from Papua New Guinea, he would be like, I've done more for these people than God himself. The man he's completely outrageously delusional. But here's the thing. There are people who treat it like, oh, women don't like him just because they're mad because he's a man's man and stuff like that. Nah, women don't like him because he had sexual relations with a pornographic actress while his wife was pregnant. That's why. That's not something that women would think were cool. And if he ever came out and said, I did this thing, it's terrible. I'm sorry. It's a terrible thing I did, right? Like, if he ever came out and did that, people might be willing to forgive him, right? But have you ever heard him say, yeah, that was kind of low on my part? No, he doesn't take.
Was he part of with that entourage? I forgot. Is it Weinstein, the guy who was a billionaire who would get underage women?
You thinking Epstein? But
Epstein, yeah.
But everybody in New York on some level was associated with him. But my thing about Trump is that all this stuff about his problem with women voters, especially educated women voters, it doesn't come out of anywhere. Like Kamala's problem with black men is a construction. It's based off of something that isn't true, right? So think about it. One of the things that they've said, one of the things that they said is, Kamala Harris put black men in jail. Again, I find that argument to be racist anyway. But she's a prosecutor. Prosecutor's job is to enforce the law. And when you enforce the law, obviously you're going to catch people who are accused of doing crimes. And some of the people who are accused of doing crimes are black. She didn't specifically target black men. If she's a prosecutor, how would she keep her job if she decided, you're black, I'm not going to prosecute you? That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
And there is this incel movement that is pushed through social media where men are told, because women are more educated, they're making more money, many of them are choosing not to have children, that somehow they don't need you. That's what the message is. Since the feminist revolution, that's what's wrong with America. Women don't. I've sat in barbershops and heard men say that. Yeah, that's the problem. They don't need a man. And I turn to them and I go, why is that a problem? Why should they need you? What are you providing that they need you? Okay, like if you're providing something, you're in a barbershop. This guy was in a barbershop talking about issues that he was having with two women who had his children. And he's complaining, like, why would these women, why would these women need you? You basically telling me they're making it on their own, obviously, because you're unable to do something. But there are a lot of black men in this country who feel emasculated, who feel like they aren't treated as men. And here's the other thing they said. It's the culture war issues. I've sat in a barbershop and listened to guys obsess about Dwayne Wade's parenting skills. Because
What about his Wade?
Because Dwayne Wade has a trans child. Okay? Again, we have lives to live. We don't care about that sort of thing because that's a parent raising their kid. I said, you guys care more about that. I'm trying to figure out what his grades are, what her grades are. Are her grades good? Is she a good person? Does she do things in the community? Does she listen to her parents? Like, these are the things I'm interested in. And you sitting around telling me, yeah, if this person becomes president, look, the other thing, again, Mike, I go into these places because I like to listen. Every black man on TV is allegedly gay. There's a gay agenda being pushed. And so what happens is this misinformation that's coming, and from Trump's perspective too, that's said to white young men as well, is that, hey, there's a system going around. Men aren't respected. Me Too has gotten out of control. Women don't know their place. They don't understand. And so they're taking it out on you, and we shouldn't let women be in charge, period. And if a woman's in charge, God knows what's going to happen. Right? So that is appealing to a certain kind of thinker or non-thinker. I'd rather say that that's a non-thinker, because I will say this. Most of the thinking black men I know, the thinking Latino men I know, don't see a good reason to vote for Trump because they know what their lives were like when Trump was president. And one of the things is there's an amplification socially of this racism that they feel. Because Trump is like, oh, it's not racist. I'm just saying what I think. And so now that becomes that becomes a way to appeal to that kind of, I'm not going to use the word toxic masculinity. I'm going to use this word, men who feel that society has left them behind.
No, and Jesse Waters from Fox and Friends, he made a comment on that. He did a video, and I was like, he says, men who vote for the vice president needs to have their head examined and question their masculinity. So he mentioned that on his own show, and I'm like, wow, they are not hiding it. And so when we started the segment earlier, the black job, all these coded words, they're definitely saying it to say, that's my guy, I need to vote for him, despite the issues. Let me ask you something, which would make me switch into a different topic to a degree. Byron Reynolds, he's a congressman from Florida. I mean, he made a comment again about blacks, that black people were better under Jim Crow. I'm paraphrasing, but he was talking about a particular time of when black families were more conservative. He went on various interviews, but never was able to clarify what he meant. Like, why would he use? They kept asking, why would you pick that era of all other eras to raise your point, to reemphasize your point? And that's the part that I'm concerned about, because that brings me to Black Maga. I mean, who are they? Where are they? I've engaged with some. I don't know if you have. And I was able to debunk the misinformation that they had. Have you ever run into Black Maga? What do you think of this conservative movement that we were better under Jim Crow era?
Okay, so there's a couple of things going on in there. And in Black Maga, there are a lot of people. They are the ADOS people. These are people who feel like the only true black people are people who are descendants of African Americans that were born here. Okay. So there's a combination of those people. There's a combination of religious conservatives, people who are really religiously conservative, and they go on the MAGA bandwagon. There's a coalition of people who are anti-vaxxers, black anti-vaxxers, right? And so these black anti-vaxxers also fit into the MAGA. There's a coalition of for lack of a better word, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. There's a group of black men who are incels, okay, who are misogynist and to their core, and that appeals to them because part of Trump's appeal is there's a certain kind of misogyny in it, you know. It's the misogyny of always commenting on a woman's looks, right? Like he can't help himself. He has to. So that coalition, they form an interesting thing because each of them wants something differently. But for example, the black conservatives who are evangelicals or for lack of a better word, I would categorize them as evangelical. They're not interested in what we're talking about. They're interested in social issues, right? And so they're interested in, and they'll tell you, they're interested in crime in the black community. That's what they'll say. They're interested in out of wedlock births in the black community, which is something that they harp on. They're interested in anti-gay, anti-lesbian, anti-LGBTQI, all of it. They're anti that, and they don't want their kids being taught that it's okay and being indoctrinated, so to speak. And so they have this position about what is moral. And their feeling is that what has happened to black Americans is, and this is why Byron Donald says what he says. Oh, look, during Jim Crow, we couldn't sit in the front of the bus, but we all wore suits. That forgets the point that everybody then wore suits. What are you talking about? Before Jim Crow, look, there wasn't really a drug epidemic in the black community, or strike that. There wasn't a drug epidemic in the black community. Don't strike that. What are you talking about? Of course, there's always been drugs in the black community, and there's been a system of trying to funnel drugs into the black community. That's what the crack epidemic of the 80s was all about. They'll say, hey, before Jim Crow, black families stayed together. During Jim Crow, what are you talking about? You had a system in which black families were separated from the time that whites could make money off of splitting families up. So this idea that, black families have always been together that doesn't make sense. And during Jim Crow, a lot of white families didn't break up either because it wasn't easy for a woman to be able to leave a man then. There are lots of factors.
I was going to bring up the laws that were in place before then. Women were beholden to stay with the man because they had no other choice. Was it 1978? They were allowed to open their own checking account.
Yeah. So it's you know, Lily Ledbetter just died, right? Like, so before then, a woman could do the same job as a man and not get paid what a man is getting paid. And so what they do is they conflate social issues. And they act like the freer the society gets, the worse it is. And they say things like Democrats have made black people dependent on welfare, when obviously we know that the highest recipient rates of welfare going up and up and up and up and up every year is whites. But they say, hey, this is what Democrats do. They give you free stuff. They promise black people free stuff, and they never, ever do anything. Now, they may have some points about Democrats not necessarily fulfilling promises that they've made to African Americans. But you can't point to me any legislation in the past 40, 50 years that Republicans have done that have materially affected the lives of black people in this country. So if Democrats do something for unions, that helps black people. If Democrats do something, for example, for healthcare, that helps black people. If Democrats do something for education, that helps black people. But they don't see it in those terms. And there are a group of people who feel like they're special. You remember we talk about this with W.E.B. Du Bois and the Talented 10. There are there are a group of people in the group who think that they're special, and that the problem is they aren't in charge. And so if they were in charge, there would be no crime in any city. If they were in charge, all the kids would be straight. If they were in charge, every kid would be going to Harvard, right? Like or Morehouse or Spelman, whatever it is. And that's the appeal on that end. And then the appeal to I see that with a lot of MAGA women. And then the appeal to the black men is it's an appeal to masculinity. It is saying that you are not where you used to be. You've always had a problem being respected, black man. This is what Trump is saying. You've always had a problem being respected, black man, but now nobody respects you at all. You got these immigrants coming in before you. This is the other group, right? This group saying, look, you have all these Africans, you have all these Haitians, all these people from the Caribbean coming in, and they're being given things that you, whose parents and grandparents were descendants of slaves, don't get. That's part of the appeal.
And it goes to why certain state governments, even federal governments, jobs, they have, I feel like, lowered their criteria. So now you don't need a college degree for a particular post within a federal or a state agency. I was just talking to a state police officer. He's saying that all you need is a high school degree. And I said, I'm concerned because there's a certain level of maturity that comes with someone who has a higher degree of education, whether it be associates or even finished with the liberal arts. And that's, to me, you're watering down the criteria. There are those in the black community who feel like the only reason why they change it because too many of us have achieved that goal that has their master's or a doctorate or whatever certification is needed to not only take on the job, but be the head department of that job. So that's when they feel like they're watering down the criteria. Not to mention higher education has gotten unaffordable, but that's another point.
But look at the criteria. Highly educated black men are not Trump supporters. Educated black women are not Trump supporters, right? That tells you something. Educated whites are not Trump supporters. And I'm not saying by the vast majority, right? And so my point is that there is something about getting an education that just makes you look at things a little differently. You could still vote Republican, but you're not going to believe that Haitians are eating cats. Like that just doesn't make sense to you. Okay, because you're able to ascertain that. You're not going to believe that FEMA is just giving people $750 because Kamala Harris went down and she handed out checks to migrants in Springfield, Ohio. There is something about being willfully ignorant that helps Trump. And there are a lot of
like
people
taking bleach.
Yes.
During the COVID era, educated people are going to question that. Like, what? That doesn't make sense.
None of it. And that's the thing is like you get to a point where you're like, oh, yeah, none of this makes sense. Right? None of it makes sense.
Yeah, so I'll say this. This has been a very interesting topic that we've covered regarding the black job and sexism. And the fear of others is still, or the unknown is still there. It's still present. So
remember that PE record, "Fear of a Black Planet."
Oh yeah.
That's what it is. You know,
Public Enemy #1.
Fear of a Black America. You know, like there's, and I'm laughing when I say this because it isn't anything new. It is the reason people do it is because obviously it works, right? If you can get people to be afraid, then they're not really thinking straight, right? And if they're not thinking straight, they're going to vote against their interests because whatever their interests are, how they feel about themselves is way more important. And so Trump gives them this sense that you haven't done anything wrong. Okay. The way you think about it, you're right. You're not a racist for thinking, you know, that black people are prone to committing crime. You're not a racist for thinking that. You're not a racist. You're not sexist for commenting about how great a woman looks, even though she hasn't asked you for a compliment and you don't know her. And if she says something, she's just, you know, you're not a bigot for saying, hey, you know, I'm not really interested in having gay people in the military or around me or teaching my children or any of that. Like, you're not a bigot. So he gives them this sense of comfort that allows them. And then he triggers, you know, people like he can no longer trigger me because I've accepted the fact that there's a very high likelihood that he could be president again. And once I've accepted that fact, I sleep better at night. You know, it doesn't, because I've done all I can do as a citizen to make sure that he's not president again. And I think that the candidate who's running for president now has done an admirable job in contesting Trump's attempt to return to the presidency. But there's not much that people could do at this point. You know, I agree.
I feel like I'm doing my best. I make the phone calls. I remind voters. I knock on doors. I registered voters. I put out the lawn signs. Doing this podcast, special edition. Doing everything I can, engage in the community. I've gone to various communities to talk to new voters as well as legacy voters or people who vote often, pardon me, and, you know, talk about the issues and not afraid of it. So, that's good. We'll see what happens in a few weeks when the final count comes. To that, stay tuned for my closing thoughts. Thanks, Sam.
Vote blue.
Hey, this episode has concluded, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. I ask that you subscribe to this podcast, which can be found on Apple, Spotify, YouTube channel, or my very own website, cuckooforpolitics.com. You can also follow me on social media, Facebook, cuckoo, the number 4 politics, or on Instagram, cuckoo, the number 4 politics. I welcome all feedback. Listen, this election is evenly split. It's neck and neck. Both parties are looking to mobilize every possible voter, including those motivated by cultural issues rather than policy stances. Remember, when political figures use dog whistles, they often rely on coded language that resonates with certain groups while remaining ambiguous enough to avoid direct confrontation. Don't get distracted. Remember, one candidate is using fear with mass deportation without offering plausible solutions. It's a distraction, so you don't know that they don't really have a concrete plan. They don't have a concept of a plan. That's one candidate. They're using fear and biases. When they use the terms low IQ or misuse the concepts of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're really talking about you. So you don't realize They have a disdain for the progress America has become. Gender equality, racial equality. Fortunately, these tactics have been used before. He used them in 2016. He tried to use it in 2020, but he's definitely using it in 2024. He's also saying, wink, wink, do you really want a woman, a black woman as president, commander-in-chief? I'm pausing for a real good reason. The Vice President Harris is the real candidate for America. Again, Donald Trump is not the traditional Republican in the likes of Eisenhower, Reagan, the Bushes, for that matter. He's a con man. Saving our democracy is key. We don't want another insurrection. We don't want a candidate or a politician who uses strokes of fear. We want someone with plausible solutions, along with working with others of the same party or a different party. Donald Trump has not noted once that he's willing to work with anyone else. He keeps referring to himself as I could do this alone. Can you do anything alone? Can you run a business, your house alone? Can you run a relationship alone? No. It takes partners. It takes communication. It takes understanding. This is Michael, host of the political podcast Cuckoo for Politics. I'll probably have more episodes down the line, but definitely a full season in the new year. Listen, don't forget to vote November 5th, Election Day. Until the next podcast, stay blessed.